He said, have you thought about creating a virtual assistant for yourself? So feeding all of the data that you give to patients into the robots and it creating an online version of you for when I'm asleep. I pondered it for about 24 hours and then said, actually, I don't need that in my life.
If you put shit in, you will get shit out. But you might put something in, and if you don't know that you're getting shit out, then I think we have a potentially huge problem with that.
I think the creative world is probably the most threatened at the moment, whether that is art, film, music, people who actually design or have their own input, their own personalized styles.
What I love about humans is that we make nonlinear connections between different concepts. The robots aren't capable of that.
It feels a bit movie-like, but from Elon Musk a few years back now, but his quote was, and it sticks with me because it does make me feel a bit threatened, but I hope the robots are kind.
Podcast 14, Karl.
We are here, into teenage years.
Absolutely, into the adolescence of the podcast. I understand that you have to do like 200 of these before it actually becomes like masterful.
Wow.
I know.
Okay.
I'll see you in 4 years' time.
Yeah.
We're in a new studio, so there might be a bit of an echo. At some point we might put egg cups all over the walls. And there's also a beautiful church, so that might ding in about 4 minutes' time. Mm-hmm. So if you are listening to this podcast and you hear a church bell, hopefully that's a nice thing, but it's not outside your own house. The doorbell went on one of these recordings and it threw us both, didn't it? We're going to talk about AI, artificial intelligence at its simplest, and we're doing this over the course of 3 podcasts, aren't we? So this one will be shorter. I think it's just useful to preface all of this, which is that we went rather long form with the last one, and hopefully people enjoyed that. Now we're going to see what happens when they're 20 minutes long. And it's a series of 3. We will talk about AI generally, and then we'll move into 2 different themes across the course of the next week or 2. So where do we begin, Karl? What is artificial intelligence? From your perspective, if you had to define it, without looking at ChatGPT or Google.
I do have an explanation here. Yeah, artificial intelligence is something actually I don't know how to define particularly well myself. I know it appears in my life. I know it is not human. I know that there is an intelligence to it, but I think the intelligence is defined by what we as humans call intelligence. It is machines that do things for us that require prompts from said humans as well. Mm-hmm. That's a really simplistic, stripped back version of what it is. It needs us. At the moment, it requires us to do things. But once we give it some prompts, it is able to do things by itself.
Okay, good start. Without looking at the show notes or the prompts that we've used to define it. So artificial intelligence, something that we prompt to do things for us, the machines. And the next 3 conversations that we have will be about our relationship with the robots. I use that as a common vernacular for anything that might be artificial, and our relationship with that. So we'll start generically and generally, and then we'll move into 2 themes within the relationships with what is already here and what is to come. So artificial intelligence, some kind of otherness that we prompt to do things. Not always true though, because first of all, I think artificial intelligence is a broad catch-all term for many things. All software or aspects of software can sometimes be clumped. Certainly contemporary software can be clumped into that. Automations, where we take human systems or software systems and then allow them to run without interventions, sometimes gets sort of classed as artificial intelligence. Then we have machine learning that is adjacent to and sometimes conveniently just clumped into this as well. And then we have that thing that we recognize as this artificial intelligence, where we will question both what artificial is and what intelligence is. Mm. But they are seemingly everywhere and becoming more and more prosaic. We're in this world, aren't we, where there is chat-like platonic relationships with an interface that we might give a name. ChatGPT feels like the name of an application, whereas Claude is obviously beginning to humanize or certainly create a synthetic consciousness because we've given it a human name. We have this text-based conversational platonic relationship stuff, and then we've got robots doing tasks that we might feel either unnecessary for humans to do or are dull and quite pedestrian and binary, like chatbots doing customer services. And then I think there's a whole world that people don't see at all, that they may never know, which is things like fraud detection using machine learning and the folding of proteins and looking at new stars and advanced materials and stuff that I am involved in my other life. But yeah, I think we're talking quite particularly about the platonic relationship with that type of chat-based interface, aren't we?
It's come a long way since Alan Turing and the code breakers.
For sure.
Back in the 40s, World War II, that started to crack the codes that were coming in from Nazi Germany. And it's just rolled and rolled and rolled since there. It's now, I wonder what Turing might say, or indeed any of the code breakers that were there at the time, some of whom are still with us, what our current relationship as human beings is with this beast that we have started to create.
For sure. So we have generative AI.
Yeah.
I ask a question, I get an answer. Some of that feels like reasoning. There's a whole debate about whether or not we are capable of programming a large language model to do reasoning and what that means technically in terms of synthesizing a prompt into an outcome. But then we have agentive AI, the next frontier. We're sort of in the thick of that now, where agents are being created to act almost autonomously, where there is human engineering to create it, but then when you put it into run, it will continue to run until you stop it running. How familiar are you with the sort of the agentive world?
Yeah, I was going to ask us to come up with an example here as well. In the next podcast, we're going to talk about the threat of AI, and perhaps for most humans, that adjunctive, the agentive AI is probably the one that feels like it's knocking on our door a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, a simple version of this would be to take what we are already familiar with, like using a number of tools to book a holiday.
Yeah.
And having a travel agent, and you sort of say, these are the types of things that I like, and this is my budget. And somebody comes back. If you went into Trailfinder or whatever, you can pay a premium over and above the cost of the actual trip for that person to sort of book all of the pieces. So your transit to the airport, your transfer from the airport, and all the sort of things that you may do while you're on a trip. And you'll pay a surcharge, I don't know, maybe 20% or 15% over and above the price for them to take all the effort away, and you just end up with a sort of a single ticket and off you pop. That's the travel agent. You could automate or you could digitize or create a synthetic version of that. So I could go to, let's call it TravelBot, and I could sort of go, okay, well, I like Asia and I like spiritual experiences, and my budget is £5,000, and it could just kick back an itinerary that might be almost perfect, and simply, it could actually transact all of the bookings as well if I enabled it to do so, and all I've simply got to do is board the plane. I guess that's quite understandable, and some people might think that that's useful. We can create agents for practically any task. Currently, those systems are imperfect. It is very unlikely that someone is going to go end to end and be able to do this with a single interface. We often have to use multiple interfaces, all of which may have some artificial intelligence embedded in it, or that we would trust the outcome. We might find that we need to just check and go, hang on a minute, there's an anomaly here. Something has happened, and I've been booked on an elephant tour and have no interest in elephants, but I didn't mention it. So it possibly could be imperfect because it may not be truly aware of our preferences. But the event horizon for people booking end-to-end trips is probably no further afield than like 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's already in trial. So I think that's hopefully helps people understand what agentive AI is. But I could use it across a whole landscape of human experience.
You created an agent for us recently, didn't you, to pull in information?
Yeah, goodness only knows what that's created, because I haven't looked at it for 2 weeks, so it could be running riot. But it doesn't have the ability to publish what it's generating. But what it does do is goes off and researches well-being, and particularly the themes and threads and the signals in the noise. It's actually called signal. that are apparent globally in the world of longevity, well-being, meaningfulness, a man's quest for meaning, these existential questions, and it pulls all of this type of content towards us and somewhat curates it into a single PDF. Now, we're not publishing that because it is synthetic and we can't guarantee the filtering over that, nor is it necessarily in our tone of voice. So there's an interventional step before a consequence of that might be published. But there are going to be people already who are simply publishing this stuff, faceless brands, or that are already creating products where there's little or no human intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the moment, this episode is about our human intervention with AI. I work in men's health. Mm-hmm. I am a coach and mentor for men who suffer with male pelvic pain. And it is something I don't feel threatened by the robots in my career. I had a conversation with a patient the other day. He works for IBM. I think I might have mentioned this in a previous podcast, who came to me, flew in from Ireland, and at the end of the session, he said, have you thought about creating a virtual assistant for yourself? So feeding all of the data that you give to patients into the robots and it creating an online version of you for when I'm asleep, or for softer, low consequence answers to common questions. I said, I haven't. I pondered it for about 24 hours and then said, actually, I don't need that in my life. And I also wouldn't like people to get medicalized information, health information from a robot without me checking it beforehand. So all that would do is create a bigger workflow for me.
Yep.
I do use Claude now, sponsorship deal, hopefully, with my day-to-day tasks. That might simply be a spell check. It might be doing a bit of research. It might be looking if I'm writing an article or something like that, whether I've repeated words or my grammar or my spelling and flow and things like that. So I use it as an assistant. That's probably where I use most of my AI at the moment. We might do a bit of research into something. Should I move abroad? Should I leave the UK? That was a conversation we had. We might do some research around some food or some recipes or something like that as well. It's become an assistant. It sits on my phone, it sits on my desktop, it sits on my laptop. And even before we came on, I did a dirty Google search. Who's the Google AI bot at the moment? But it spat something back out at me. And it sits right at the top of Google results.
Gemini.
Gemini. It sits right at the top of the Google search results. So it's easy to click the show more button and it brings up an AI-generated result. It's accessible everywhere. It's kind of hard not to use it.
For sure. I use it pretty much every day. I run Claude, and I also run a subset of Claude, or a slightly different platform within Claude, which is called Cowork. One is conversational. Cowork is more application-based. So they are related, and obviously both from Anthropic, but somewhat different tools. They're both using text-based prompts, so that you can also use voice. However, what they are doing within the environments is somewhat different. One kicks out conversational responses, although it can also kick out documents and HTML pages and what we might just call the sort of the veneer over the top of applications, whereas Cowork can build and integrate applications together and is a significantly different tool. I use that all of the time. I am in the Google environment, so Gemini is sat there, although I typically only use it to try and find an email that I remember photographically. I've got a wonderfully photographic memory, but it can maybe go and help me find something that I haven't sort of filed away or indexed. But some people use it far more prosaically than that. It's, again, a very powerful tool. And then there is sort of the AI that we don't see in many, many interfaces that we are reacting to or working with. So it's definitely everywhere. In my day-to-day work, I have synthetic team members that are robotic, or whatever we want to call them, artificially intelligent, and humans. I particularly enjoy working with humans. So yes, it's pretty pervasive in what I do. Where do you use it creatively, Karl? So, I mean, one of the things that people get quite concerned about is whether this conversation is actually happening. Now, when we record this, we are able to take our voices into an application, and if we were to have fucked up and said something we didn't want to, we could correct that by typing in text and our voices be overlaid. And people are concerned that a lot of what they're seeing, visual content, and what they are watching and what they are reading is not necessarily real. It's an important question. We'll talk about the existential threat next week. Where do you use it creatively? Where do you have your sort of red lines and your boundaries?
My creative uses of it are pretty limited, only because beyond writing, that's where most of my creativity is, blogs, content. I've used it to design some simple logos. I've used it to creatively come up with some workflows. I've used it to help with descriptions for things like YouTube. My creative limits are bound by my need for creativity in my life beyond writing. I've tried to put... I've had a mess around with making t-shirts. So I've found images on Pinterest. I've then gone into... I was using ChatGPT beforehand. I switched to Claude. And I asked it to mess around with some of the tones, some of the colors, some of the depth of some of the images, and then that would be an image I'd print on a t-shirt. I might have used it to come up with some images for an Instagram post, but it's just off. For the bots I've been using have just been off. I know I could work them harder. I know I could use other AI, but for my needs, that's about as far as I go in my life.
It's interesting, isn't it? I saw a website the other day and instantly recognized it as Claude's first pass.
Yeah.
If you ask Claude to create a web page, it's only going to be as good as the prompts inbound, right? Yeah. So you need the human content, but let's assume that it's a product that someone had developed and it's got 3 pricing levels and there's a value proposition like most pages would have, bereft of a designer or a sort of a user experience person to develop those things for you in a slightly now arcane way of taking time to do it. With a single prompt, the HTML page can be built. But it will have an aesthetic which is definitely Claude. Claude seemingly likes semi-serif typefaces and typically italicized on headlines. And as soon as I saw the site, it was like, okay, that is synthetically generated, although the intent of it and the product was obviously created, I say obviously, by humans. In my own creative work, if there is a banal task where, for example, I have to compare 2 documents or I have to ingest the intelligence, human intelligence, across 15 documents and then try to sort of paraphrase that into something meaningful, then that is a brilliant task for the machines because their computational power is exponentially more than my own to be able to hold all of that information and do in real-time comparisons, for example. And so when I'm using that synthetic intelligence to do that, I find that incredibly powerful. But what I have to be able to do is interpret the output. If you put shit in, you will get shit out. But you might put something in, and if you don't know that you're getting shit out, then I think we have a potentially huge problem with that. So even if I'm doing that type of processing, there'll be the human. I don't just pass off what comes out at the other end. For me, I used to do life drawing, and I was taught that the most important thing to do, or one idea, is to simply cover the page with charcoal and then cut back into it with the rubber that took things away so that you didn't get intimidated by a white sheet of paper. And I think I use generative AI for that, to say, okay, I'm going to take this task and at least you'll give me the first pass, but I need to understand then how to interpret that. When it comes to creative tasks, like you, I've done quite a bit of stuff with images. Again, I think that there is when it is being used at its most simple, there is an aesthetic that I can see a mile off. Now, obviously, as the tools get more advanced, things like Nano Banana and other platforms, which I've used less, then people are quite capable of creating things which are seemingly unique and not just a sort of a paraphrase or a synthesis of lots of other inputs. So I can see what a basic AI image, I can see them all over LinkedIn and all over the internet. But there are very nuanced, very competent pieces of brilliant art that will be created using artificial intelligence and the machines. And so that's not to be disingenuous to its controllers' capabilities. I don't really use it for image-based stuff, but that's just a personal choice. When I'm doing writing, then if I'm feeling lazy, there is almost a magnetism to, I'll just throw a prompt into a robot. I don't do that. I will write what I need to write. I then may ingest that into Claude's platform to identify things like typographic issues, or not typographic issues, but text and formatting or spelling mistakes because of my dyslexia. So I might ask it to give me an opinion about it, but what I don't always do is then just take the answer, because what it tends to do is paraphrase and remove tone and personality. What I love about humans is that we make nonlinear connections between different concepts. The robots aren't capable of that yet. And so when they sort of oversimplify or sort of remove the nuances, I think you're left with a lesser product. So I tend not to use it for completely creative work. I tend to use it for the stuff that is laborious. So we've got this landscape of some useful tools with this acknowledgement that at some point there are going to be these agents that are synthetic, that we either created or we've deployed, that are doing work without the human prompt, right?
It's going to get to, I mean, we are already at that point as well. I think the creative world is probably the most threatened at the moment, whether that is art, film, music, people who actually design or have their own input, their own personalized styles. That seems to be the market where it feels a little bit more vulnerable at the moment. Business, absolutely.
Totally. Yeah, where there's a job, I think you're right. The creative arts, there's a huge question mark about that. And it's interesting that you're ingesting loads of stuff, manipulating it, and then printing it out as a T-shirt. That whole idea of what IP is and what it's not, a huge question mark. And what is it to be a personality? And is Brad Pitt in all the movies that he's actually in, and people being reincarnated to take appearances in things like the Star Wars movies, for example, Carrie Fisher. So there's a huge question there about creativity and storytelling. We'll come on to that in another episode. But where a job is a function of being able to access information and analyze and synthesize with it, for example, law or insurance, which is kind of algorithmic, those things could really be under threat because humans are emotional, inconsistent. People who'll have good days and less good days, they will perform and be less performing. Whereas the robots are 24/7, do not need sleep, and currently are not emotional. That could be super threatening, right?
Yeah, it really, really could. There's a quote, isn't there? It feels a bit movie-like, but from Elon Musk a few years back now. But his quote was, and it sticks with me because it does make me feel a bit threatened, but I hope the robots are kind. I don't know how much he was playing on that. I don't know. He would certainly be one of the people who might have a bit of an idea as to where they might be going, given his input and his influence over that world as well. Don't think the only one, but perhaps the most social facing that we're aware of.
And there lies a huge existential question, which is if we are feeding the language models with human experience, some aspects of that are kind, but equally some aspects of that are less kind. There is that whole question of the singularity when the machines become conscious, and will we know? And when it happens, will they be kind? Perhaps this is where we pause to say when we next meet in the clearing for a conversation, we are going to talk about the existential threat.
Looking forward to it. This has been great. Shorter form. Hope you've enjoyed it. Do let us know your comments and your thoughts and your feedback, perhaps how AI and what your relationship with AI is at the moment. Thanks, Matt.
Just a final note. Because we think this is so important, our relationship with the machines and our observation of what we'll call anxiety-inducing technology, a different way of talking about AI, the clearing with Shoreham, which is a women's circle, and Shoreham.tech, that is an organization that enables people to understand digital technology, are meeting on the 24th of June in the evening at Shoreham Yacht Club. We will put in the show notes where people can buy tickets for that. All of the money will be donated to a charity that addresses the digital divide and ensuring that there is digital equality as we race forward into whatever the future holds. But if you're interested in this conversation about how do we live well with the robots and how do we take those first steps to understanding a world beyond chat, then that would be a great opportunity to do so. 2 hours, it's probably one of a series. Please take a look and find details about that, both in the show notes and wherever else you find the clearing.
So where can people reach out and find us, Matt?
Please subscribe to the podcast. Thank you for listening today. It's brilliant if you just click subscribe. We can then tell you when we've launched another podcast. Secondly, you can come to our website. There's lots of interesting stuff there, events that we do, content that we write, information about the podcast, where you can meet us. So please come there and subscribe. We promise not to spam you. If LinkedIn's your thing, then both Karl and I have LinkedIn pages and the clearing is there. And finally, if you'd like more visual content like Reels, then you can see us on Instagram. If you'd like to email us, email matt@theclearing.life. Same URL as the website, matt@theclearing.life, and we promise to try to answer.
I'll put all the links to all of what we've just mentioned beneath the description of this podcast.
We'll see you in the clearing. Thanks, Karl.
Thanks, Matt.